Here we can get started. Okay. All right. Maybe some other people will join us. So we've been bouncing around a little bit in American history. What have we talked about recently? Um, well, we talked about current events with the in the beginning of January. We talked about the attack on the Capitol and what that meant, and the impeachment. Now the impeachment is going on.
Mhm.
Um, President, former President Trump has been impeached for the second time. That's now being impeached by the House of Representatives is only half the process. Now the second half is the trial in the Senate, and that's going to start next week. It doesn't look like he will be found guilty. Um, so we'll see how that plays out. And then we talked about McCarthyism, Joe McCarthy in the 1950s attacking a lot of people, saying he had a list of communists in the government. Um, and then we talked for 2 weeks. We talked about the lead up to the American Revolution, the Stamp Act, the Sugar Act, the Boston Tea Party, the Boston Massacre. Okay, now we're going to jump to something totally different. Okay, the Irish potato famine. So I've got a reading. It's not super long here. Um,
Mhm.
but it's interesting. Okay, so a little bit of history, some things we've definitely never heard of before.
Mhm.
I'm not super familiar with the history of Ireland and the relationship between Ireland and England.
Mhm.
But we'll look at some maps here and we'll see the history. Um, it's interesting. I think that what makes the study of history interesting is um, when exciting things happen. And here, I mean, this is bad exciting, but it's interesting.
Mhm.
The potato famine in Ireland in the mid 1800s, 1840s and 50s, led to millions of people dying. It affected Irish history because a million people left Ireland. A million people came to the United States. So in the 1840s, 1850s. You have Irish immigrants coming to America. How were they treated? We'll look at that for a little bit. So it's interesting, and the GED test, high set test, doesn't require a great deal of world history knowledge, but this is a pretty big thing in world history. Um, something that it's good to be aware of. So we'll take turns. We'll read. Um, we'll take a look at the graphics that I've put in here. We'll just go through and see what we think. There's some good vocabulary words. I didn't highlight any of them, but there's some good vocabulary words in here we can pull out and
Mhm.
discuss. So actually, before we do backtrack, anybody have any questions? Do either of you have any questions of stuff in the news, stuff you've seen, anything social studies related that you've seen lately? Anything to discuss?
Yeah, things are crazy right now.
Yeah, I would agree. What do you what
Mhm.
in what way? What do you think?
Oh, like the virus, things like that. The coronavirus, right?
Yeah, yeah.
COVID
No,
19 and about the government, all
mhm.
kind of crazy mix up.
Yeah, it is. There's a lot going on right now. I mean,
Yeah.
the virus is like a historical event. Like people are going to be talking about that
Right.
50 years
Mm-hmm.
from now, 100 years from now.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it seems like the numbers are getting under control. The vaccine is out, and now it's very hard to get the
Yeah,
vaccine.
that's good thing. Uh-huh.
But it's there, and it's slowly getting in people.
Right.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
so that's yeah, it's interesting to see everything
Yeah.
everything we've lived through in the last 12 months.
Yeah.
It's been crazy, and there's positives that come out of it, but there's also negatives when you think of all these kids missing school and just
Yes. Mm-hmm.
not none of us can hang out with
Yeah.
loved
No.
ones,
Uh-uh.
and
Mm-mm.
It's interesting. We're
Yeah.
definitely living through something big,
Right.
that's for
Oh yeah.
sure.
A lot different than it was, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm. No social start, no social link, things like that. Social what? Company, things like that. No, nothing.
Hmm.
Oh my God, it's horrible.
Yeah.
I just want to be over.
I know. Well, the crazy thing is, like, the people say, "Well, will we ever get back to normal?" Like, I don't know. Like,
Hmm.
I heard an interesting thing. I was listening to a podcast,
Yeah,
and somebody said, "Well, you know, should let's say that we take care of this coronavirus and things get
right,
back to normal and whatever.
right. Hmm.
Doesn't it make sense if you like if we believe that wearing a mask when you're
Hmm.
sick can stop the spread of this virus?
Right.
Wouldn't it make sense that from now on we all have these masks, right? Everybody owns a
Yeah.
mask now. Wouldn't it make
Yes.
sense, like, if you get just the cold or a flu,
Hmm.
it makes sense when you go to the grocery store to wear a mask?
Yes.
And
I
yeah,
agree.
that
Hey, how
does
you
make
doing?
it does
Hmm.
make sense. Jendai, how are you?
Doing fine.
Good, good. Um, it's an
I'm
interesting
listen.
question. Yeah. Oh,
I'm so sorry. I'm late.
oh, that's okay. That's okay.
I'm,
Yeah, we're just talking. We haven't gotten into the reading
well,
yet.
I just got on, but I just want to say, you were really right when you were talking about that. Some people do ask that question, when are things going to be back to normal? Well, before the COVID-19 came, some people wore masks because I took it like they were very sick. They were sick or they were getting over being sick.
Hmm.
So I know some people are going to probably say, well, the coronavirus pandemic is now over, but that doesn't mean that you can't wash your hands. Still got to wash your hands.
Sure. Yeah.
That doesn't mean that every now and then you can't wear a mask. If you feel sick or you think that you are getting sick or you are getting over a sickness again,
Right. Right.
you can just wear a mask. I know that's what they're going to say, and that's what I would do.
Hmm.
Yeah. I mean, I'm as eager as everybody to not wear a mask. Yeah, I don't like it, but if I go to the grocery store and I have a runny nose and a cough,
Hmm.
if I wear a mask, if it keeps a couple of people from getting sick because of me, like, that's good, right?
Yeah.
So it's
Oh
an
yeah.
Well,
interesting question.
well,
It's a good.
it doesn't just have to be a grocery store. It can be anywhere.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's what I
Yeah. Oh
mean.
yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
It can
So
be anywhere. It can be
yeah.
like a museum, a church again, or it can be an
Yeah.
arboretum. Anywhere
Right.
you're
Right.
around
Yeah.
people of a mall or something. That
Hmm.
it can be that.
Yeah. At work, if you have to go to work, right?
Hmm.
Right. That's right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
That's
maybe
a
that'll
good.
be one of the things that comes out, and that would be a good thing. Like, it would be interesting to see over 5 years, 10 years,
Mm-hmm.
if we take up that practice as a society.
Mm-hmm.
Does that mean less people are going to be sick? It'd be interesting to see studies and scientific studies
Uh-huh.
about that. So no, things are changing. Um,
Yes. Mm-hmm.
so okay, well, let's jump in here. We're talking about the Irish potato famine.
Mm-hmm.
Now, again, I'm never big on memorizing years, but it is good to look at the years and see, when put it in context, right? So
Mm-hmm.
1845, 1852 is the
Mm-hmm.
Irish potato famine. That is the closest thing in America to me that makes me think of is the what's happening in America is the Civil War was 1860, right? So the parallel things happening in America is 1845, 1852. That's the lead up to the Civil War. Okay. Just
Mm-hmm.
just to put things into perspective. So let me read. Let's preview this reading. So we've got an introduction. We have Ireland in the 1800s. We're going to learn a little bit about Ireland. Okay, some things
Mm-hmm.
that we've never heard of before. The Irish and British government system. We'll learn a little bit about. The Great
Mm-hmm.
Hunger begins. There we've got a picture of Queen Victoria.
Mm-hmm.
We got a graph of Irish U.S. immigrants by year. We'll take a look at legacy of the potato famine and Irish hunger memorials. This is a thing in New York that I found that I think is pretty cool. So we'll take a look, okay, and see where this fits into history. Okay, so we'll take turns. I'll get us started, and then we can go from there. Okay, so this is a famous. Well, I don't know if it's famous, but this is something I found. This is from that time. Um, an engraving. Maybe this appeared in a book or like a history book at the time, or in the newspapers. Um, okay, so let's jump in. It says the Irish potato famine, also known as the Great Hunger, began in 1845 when a fungus-like organism called Phytophthora infestans, or P. infestans, spread rapidly. So a fungus-like organism spread rapidly throughout Ireland. The infestation ruined up to one half of the potato crop that year, and about 3/4 of the crop over the next 7 years. Because the tenant farmers of Ireland, then ruled as a colony of Great Britain, relied heavily on the potato as a source of food, the infestation had a catastrophic impact on Ireland and its population. Before it ended in 1852, the potato famine resulted in the death of roughly 1 million Irish from starvation and related causes, and at least another million forced to leave their homeland as refugees. So that's an introduction paragraph. Kind of tells us, this kind of probably most likely summarizes everything we're gonna read about. Okay. Interestingly, last week we talked about the American colonies, right? The British colonies in America, and how in 1776 they declared their independence. Well, here, 1776 to 1845 is what, almost 60 years, right? 70 years. And Ireland is still a colony of Great Britain. So last week we talked about all the colonies around the world in the 1600s, 1700s, 1800s, and here we talk about colonies again. 1845, Ireland is still a colony of Great Britain. So just like the Americans, the American colonists, we looked over the last 2 weeks, weren't crazy about the things happening, the way Britain was ruling the American colonies. We're going to see some problems in that colonial relationship between the colonies and the colonizers, Britain and Ireland. Okay. Ruby, could you read paragraph 2 for us?
Oh, I might struggle. I'm not good reader. Ireland in the 1800s with the references, yes?
That's ratification.
Ratification of the Acts of Union in 1801. Ireland was effectively governed as a colony of Great Britain until its War of Independence in the earlier 20th centuries. Together, the combined nation were known as the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland. Has thus the British government appointed Ireland's
executive
heads of state, non respectively has the Lord. Oh, I don't know this.
Yeah, that's a word, lieutenant.
Lieutenant and the Chief Secretary of Ireland. Although residents of the
that's Emerald Isle, a nickname for Ireland, the Emerald Isle.
Emerald Isle could elect represents
Representation.
representation to the parliament. Yes,
Parliament.
parliament in London.
Okay, thank you. Very good.
Thank
So
you for correcting me. Oof.
yeah, it's okay. Yeah, my pleasure. So Ireland was a colony of Britain. It says until its War of Independence in the 20th century. So sometime in the 20th century is the 1900s. So, and there's a history there between Ireland and Northern Ireland. So on this map, green is Ireland, and then part of that island is Northern Ireland, which stayed with the United Kingdom. So, I don't know all the details about the breakup between the British colony of Ireland and the United Kingdom in pink on this map. But they were a colony of Great Britain at the time through, into the 1900s, which is kind of surprising. And it says, as such, the British government appointed Ireland's executive heads of state. So just like we saw last week and the week before, that relationship between the colonists and the colonizers is a power struggle. And so Britain, or the parliament, the government in London, is appointing the leaders in Ireland. Okay, which in America, the problem that the American colonists, the British colonists in America, the problem they had was they wanted to run their own things, right? They wanted to run their own government and be their own government. So you're always going to have a problem when you have colonies. People, as we see around the world throughout history, people don't like to be colonists. Eventually, they're all going to want to run their own country and be in control of themselves. Okay. Brittany, could you read paragraph 3?
She's a mute.
Yeah, maybe. Brittany, are you there? All right, we'll come back to Brittany. Jendaya, could you read paragraph 3?
Sure. In all, Ireland sent 105 representatives to the House of Commons, the lower house of Parliament, and 28 peers, titled landowners, to the House of Lords on the upper house. Still, it's important to note that the bulk of these elected representatives were landowners of British origin and or their sons. In addition, any Irish who practiced Catholicism, the majority of Ireland's native population were initially prohibited from owning or leasing land. Leasing land,
Leasing, yeah.
voting, or holding elected office under the so-called penal laws.
Yeah. The penal laws. So the penal laws is to punish, like to penalize somebody. So the penal laws are to penalize. Now, again, I don't know the exact history there, but if there's laws called the penal laws, it means they're being penalized, punished. Okay, so the one thing that I know about Ireland and Northern Ireland and Britain is at this time, actually for several hundred years, you have tension between Catholics and Protestants, okay, which are both Christians. So think of the Christian church. They follow Jesus Christ, right? Believe in God and believe in Jesus Christ. But there's kind of two branches of Christianity. There's Catholicism, the Catholic Church, and Protestantism, which is like Presbyterians and Lutherans and evangelicals, okay? Christians that are not Catholic. Those, and it goes back hundreds of years, I think to the 1500s. And in Ireland, those two groups fought each other. And even to this day in Ireland and Northern Ireland, you have basically terrorist groups attacking each other, both of them both calling themselves Christian, between Protestants and Catholics. There's a violent dislike and problem between those two. So we see here the penal laws. Any Irish who practiced Catholicism, the majority of Ireland's native population, could not own or lease land, couldn't buy land, couldn't vote, couldn't hold elected office. Okay. Now that's not anything we've ever seen in America. Now, in America's past, there have been anti-Catholic ideas before. For a long time in the 1800s and into the 1900s, you have, as we're going to see, what we're going to look at a graph, you have big in the 1800s, you have big immigrant populations coming into the United States. Okay, so America's population booms, it grows a lot because there's a lot of immigrants coming in. A lot of those European immigrants, like we're going to see the Irish, are Catholic. You have a lot of anti-Catholic thought and attitudes here in the United States. But it was all unofficial. You know, it's not racism exactly because it's not a different race, but it's prejudice against Catholics, people who are Catholic, practicing the Catholic Christian faith. But in Ireland, it's a law that if you practice the Catholic faith, you can't own land, you can't vote, you can't hold elected office. So we're going to see some tension between the Irish and the English, the colonists and the colonizers.
Mhm.
Okay, let me read paragraph 4. Although the penal laws were largely repealed, taken off, taken back, repealed by 1829, their impact on Ireland's society and governance was still being felt at the time of the potato famine's onset, which is 1845. English and Anglo-Irish families owned most of the land. Okay, so here's a word. What does Anglo-Irish mean?
No idea.
We notice some similarities. English is ENG, Anglo is ANG.
Oh, okay.
Okay. It comes from the same root word. I don't know what it is, but Anglo refers to somebody from England.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Maybe it has to do with Latin or something. But Anglo-Irish would be these English families who come over and live in Ireland. So they're not Irish, they're Anglo-Irish.
Okay.
Right? They're Irish people, they're living in Ireland now, today, but they're from England. So it says, English and Anglo-Irish families owned most of the land, and most Irish Catholics were relegated to work as tenant farmers, forced to pay rent to the landowners. Okay. A tenant farmer, and we had at the time tenant farmers in the United States. A tenant farmer is a farmer, but doesn't own his land. He needs to rent the land from generally a rich person. And you're not going to become rich by being a tenant farmer. If you grow crops, let's say you grow wheat or potatoes, you're going to give sometimes 80%, 90% of your crops to the person whose land you are renting.
Oh, wow.
Okay. So you're not, being a tenant farmer in Ireland and in America is not good.
Okay.
So it says Irish Catholics were relegated to work as tenant farmers, forced to pay rent to the landowners. Ironically, less than 100 years before the famine's onset, the potato was introduced to Ireland by the landed gentry. Gentry is like nobility, the rich people. However, despite the fact that only one variety of potato was grown in the country, the so-called Irish lumper, it soon became a staple food of the poor, particularly during the cold winter months. Okay, so these people were the Irish, the Catholic Irish people were barred by law from holding office, from owning land. So if you can't own land, you gotta, and you know, lots of people are farmers, you need to rent your land. Well, you're not going to get rich because you have to give so much of your crops and your profit to your landowner. And so these people are are very poor.
Mm.
But the fortunate thing is that the potato, you know, when you know, the regular white potato that we make French fries out of and a baked potato, it's actually one of the most nutritious single things you can eat. Like you can survive, and these people did. You can survive on just eating white potatoes. Um, like if anybody ever says, you know, if you ever playing a game and they say, well, you're going to go to a desert island and you can only take one food, you should choose a white potato because there's enough nutrition and water. There's lots of water in there's, you know, water in a potato. You can live just on eating a white potato. So these people were dirt poor. All they had was potatoes to eat, like breakfast, lunch, and dinner, potato. But fortunately for them, it's a very nutritious food. So they were you can be fairly healthy just eating potatoes. You're not going to be happy, maybe, you know, but it's for as far as single foods go, like eating just one thing for the rest of your life, it's actually a pretty good choice. Okay, but the point here is they're dirt poor and it's a good staple food, staple, you know, like a reliable food source for the poor, particularly during the cold winter months.
Mm.
Brittany, are you there? You want to read a
I am.
paragraph?
Yeah, yeah.
Brittany, still muted.
I can read.
Okay. All right, go ahead.
Great hunger begins. When the crops began to fail in 1845 as a result of pea infestant infection, Irish leaders in Dublin petitioned Queen Victoria and Parliament to act, and initially they did, repealing the so-called Corn Laws and their tariff on grain, which made food such as corn and bread prohibitively expensive. Still, these changes failed to offset the growing problems of the potato blight, with many tenant farmers unable to produce sufficient food for their own consumption, and the cost of other supplies rising. Thousands died from starvation, and hundreds of thousands more from disease caused by malnutrition.
All right, Oluwakemi, thank you.
You-
Okay, so there's a picture of Queen Victoria. Um, the 1800s is sometimes called the Victorian Age. If you've ever heard that phrase, the Victorian era or the Victorian Age, that refers to the time period when she was queen. I forget how long she was queen. I think it was over 50 years. So it's a good portion of time that Queen Victoria of England, and there she is. That's called the Victorian Age. Okay, so they repealed the so-called Corn Laws, the tariffs, the taxes. A tariff is a tax on grain, um, but you're still not. So it's easier to sell your crops if you're a tenant farmer in Ireland, but the potato blight, a blight is just like what happens is with this, a blight is just like when your crops get a disease, okay, like a crop disease. It's called a blight. Um, what this P. infestans fungus did, it's like a fungus, and so and I've read about it elsewhere. So you plant crops, right? Now, where does a potato grow?
Underground?
Underground. Okay, so you have leaves on, you know, a plant above the ground. Your potato, when you plant a field of potatoes, and your potatoes are growing under the ground, you can't see them, right?
Right.
What the way this fungus works is it affects the potato, but it doesn't affect the leaves, the plant part of it above the ground.
Uh-huh.
So you go the whole summer and you're watering your plants and you're taking care of it, but you're not
Mhm.
pulling up any potatoes because it's not time to harvest them yet. But under the
Well,
ground, they're getting ruined by this fungus. So
a
at
Wow.
the end
potato
of,
is a potato is a root of a plant, like a carrot is a root of a plant, and
yeah,
onions. That's
right.
the same thing with a sweet potato and a potato and a yam.
Right, right. So it's a root vegetable. But the thing is,
Yeah.
so you think you've got a field full of wonderful potatoes because all the leaves are green, things are going
Mhm.
well. But then at
Right.
harvest time, you go to dig up your potatoes and they're just mush, right?
Mhm.
It's not a firm, nice potato. It's just
Right.
like they've rotted.
Mhm.
And so imagine, and then you go over your whole field as a
Mhm.
tenant farmer and you've got no potatoes.
Right.
And that happened year after year after year. For about 10 years,
Mm.
like 7 out of the 10 years,
Mm.
almost the whole crop and the whole country was ruined. They
Wow.
got a couple of good years here and there, but for I think 7 out of 10 years, like you'd go to dig up your potatoes, keeping your fingers crossed, hoping they're good this year, and it's just like the potatoes are all mushy. So it's called a potato blight.
Okay.
So, and so if I'm that tenant farmer, I can't, I've got no crops. I have no harvest, which means the landowner that I'm renting my land from is going to be angry, maybe kick me off my land if I can't pay him the rent for the land, right?
Mhm.
And then, normally in a good year, let's say I sell 90% of my crops and then I keep 10% for myself and my family. So not only can I not pay my rent on my land, and I may be kicked off my land and then I'll be homeless and out of a job.
Mhm.
But I also don't have any food to store for myself for the coming year. I have nothing to trade with my neighbors. Maybe I'm a potato farmer, he's a carrot farmer, and we barter, we trade a little, right? So a whole country like that, and things are pretty bad. It says thousands died of starvation, hundreds of thousands more from disease caused by malnutrition.
Mm.
And here's another engraving at the time. Yeah, these guys aren't looking so good.
Mm-mm.
Um,
Yeah.
so let me read. Jendai, why don't you read paragraph 6 for us, please?
Complicating complicating matters further, historians have since concluded was that Ireland continued to export large quantities of food, primarily to Great Britain during the blight. In cases such as livestock and butter, research suggests that exports may have actually increased during the potato famine. In 1847 alone, records indicate that commodity, no,
Commodities.
commodities such as peas, beans, rabbits, fish, and honey continue to be exported from Ireland, even as the Great Hunger ra- ra-
Ra-
ravaged.
ravaged.
I'm sorry, ravaged the countryside.
Okay, so here's another problem. They continued to export to sell overseas. They continued to export the food that they were growing: livestock, butter, peas, beans, rabbits, fish, honey. There's food to eat, but they're
Mhm.
selling it, right?
Mm.
So
Mhm.
not everybody was a potato farmer. There's other things being grown, um, and it lists them there, but they're selling them for profit,
Mhm.
um, largely to Great Britain, right? If the Parliament in London, if the government in London was smart, they would say, "Hey, we should stop buying things from Ireland because their people are starving. We should just let them keep it or whatever, make a plan, something." But they're selling the food that they do have. They're selling it to Great Britain and exporting it to other countries or maybe France or other nearby countries. Um, which is just that must be very frustrating when you live in Ireland and like maybe the potatoes are all bad, but there's other stuff to eat, but we have to sell it. You know, that must just be awful.
Mhm.
Ruby, could you read paragraph 7 for us?
Okay, thanks. The potato crops didn't fully recover until 1852. By then, the damage was done. Although est- estimates
Estimates.
estimates vary. It is believed as many as 1 million Irish men, women, and children are
Perished.
perished during the famine, and other another 1 million immediate immediate
Emigrated.
immigrated from the island to escape property and starvation, with many landing in viruses, yes, uh,
Various.
various cities throughout North America and Great Britain.
Okay, thank you. So 1 million people died, another 1 million people emigrated. Now that's a good word, emigrated. We hear
Immigrated.
about
Okay.
immigration, which is IM,
Mm-hmm.
immigration. Immigration and emigration are two sides of the same thing. Okay.
Okay.
But it goes back to root words. Now, again, I don't know if this is Latin or what, but the prefix IM means in, right?
Mm.
Like an import is when you buy something from overseas. If I import, let's say I import potatoes, that means I'm buying potatoes and bringing them into my country.
Mm-hmm.
If I export potatoes, that means I'm selling my potatoes out of this country, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
import and export. Also, you have immigration is people coming into the United States. We hear about that all the time. People talk about immigrants or immigration.
Mm-hmm.
That's people coming into this country. Emigrated, this says another 1 million people emigrated from the island to escape poverty and starvation. That's people leaving. So you don't ever hear about American emigration, but you could. Emigration means people leaving. Immigration with an I means people coming. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a good, good word to be aware of.
Mm-hmm.
So 1 million people died, 1 million people left Ireland. Now, I
Right.
don't know the population of Ireland at the time, a couple of million, um, but that must be a big number, right? It must be a big chunk of Ireland's population. 1 million people died, and then another 1 million people left the
Mm-hmm.
country. Um, okay, so let's look at this graph. It's good for the GED test, high set test. You got to be able to read a graph, make sense of it, understand what it's trying to tell you. So it says Irish US immigrants, okay, immigrants coming into the United States.
Mm-hmm.
Irish US immigrants by year. We have 1820 up to what's that, 1968. So each little line is a year, and then they give us every 4 years labeled. We have 50,000 people, 100,000 people, 200,000 people. Okay. So what year was the potato famine? What are we talking here?
The 1800s.
1840s, I think it said 45, right?
Oh,
Was the
okay,
first
45.
year. So
Uh-huh.
1845, probably right here. Then
Mm-hmm.
46, 47, 48, 49,
Mm-hmm.
50, 51. So maybe, if I'm not mistaken, the peak year
Mm-hmm.
of Irish people coming into the United States was 1851, maybe,
Okay.
and then 52, 53. So that late 1840s, 1850, huge increase, right? Whereas 20 years before, you're way down here. right?
Right.
So you go from maybe 20,000 to 200,000. So it increases by 10 times.
Yep.
Then what happens immediately after that? It's high, high, super high, a little, goes
Then
down a little bit,
go down.
goes way down here, right?
Yes.
What's that? Maybe 10,000 people, less than 10,000 people
Yes.
from 200,
Yes.
220. What do you think caused that? When you see statistics like this, it tells a story, and you can blend that with the history that you know and make some assumptions. So it's super high, it climbs very quickly, stays high, and then bam, almost nothing. Why do we think that might be? What might be the cause of that?
They don't have money to travel. Yes. No.
Oh, that's an interesting idea. Okay, so the Irish people want to come to the United States, but they can't.
Yes.
Okay, maybe.
Yeah, maybe because they were very poor that time, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, it definitely, I don't know exactly what, but it
Yeah.
definitely
So
would
I
be
just
hard
guess.
to and cost money to travel
Right.
by boat across
Right.
the ocean.
That's why I just guess also.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Jendai, what do you think? What might cause such a steep drop off in the number of immigrants?
What do I think?
Yeah, I mean, what could be a possibility?
Well, it depends. Well, I would say if a drop off if there was not many immigrants, I'm sorry.
Well, what could cause that?
Mm,
I mean, there was a lot of immigrants, and then all of a sudden, almost none. See way down here.
Yeah, I think because of the farming in the land, and then people we are not willing to do slavery any longer. I think as at that time, yeah,
Yeah, there
I
was
think
slavery in the United States. Yeah.
slavery is like dying down or something like that.
Okay, so there could be, maybe those early, lots of people certainly came. Maybe those early immigrants came and found that America wasn't all that great. Now, an Irish person wouldn't be put into slavery because in American history, only the Africans and African Americans were the slaves. But
one
if you're coming
one of the
over,
reasons why
yeah, go ahead.
one of the reasons why we're called one of the reasons why we call ourselves African Americans is because of that. I was going to say after I was trying to think about what you were trying to say, I was going to say African Americans. What the reason why that's how we're called is because we were put in slavery. We were in slavery. We were slaves. That's one of the reasons why we're called African Americans, if I'm knowing this correctly.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, because the first slaves, not every slave, but the first ones were brought directly from Africa, right? But that unfortunate title of being a slave was something only for African Americans. However, if you were a poor Irish person with, let's say, no skills other than being a potato farmer, maybe, you come to the United States, you're going to have a tough life. You were a tenant farmer in Ireland, you're probably going to be a tenant farmer. You're not going to show up with any money, right? So you're probably going to be a poor tenant farmer in the United States. Maybe, as Olawakimi said, or kind of what I think you were getting at, maybe the word got back to Ireland and people said, hey, don't come to America. It's no good. It's not worth it, right? Maybe that's the case. When you see such a steep cutoff of immigrants for it looks like just 1 year and then it bounces up a little bit, maybe there was a law passed in the United States, right? maybe a huge influx, a huge flow of Irish immigrants who were Catholic, right? Largely, most of these people were Catholic, and Catholics were not welcomed exactly into the United States at the time. Maybe Congress put a law, put a stop to immigrants from Ireland. Maybe they said, hey, we can't keep this up. 200,000, a quarter million uh, immigrants per year, it looks like 150,000. Uh,
Mhm.
maybe they passed the law. Maybe that's why that number is so low,
Okay.
right? So the job of a historian is to look at a graph like this and to say, why might that be? And then you take the new knowledge of this graph, you take your old knowledge of what we've read and what you know about American history, and you think, why might that happen? Why is that number so low, right?
Mhm.
So so it says the potato crop didn't fully recover until 1852. So 45 to 52, it's less than a decade. Okay. And then, you know, why was their crops healthy after that? I don't know. Did they come up with some um uh what do you call it when you put like a herbicide
Fertilizer.
or a fertilizer?
Fertilizer.
Yeah, fertilizer.
Fertilizer.
Yeah, did
Uh-huh.
they come up with some fertilizer that solved the
Mm.
problem, or
Right.
just did the fungus just kind of disappear just
Yes.
naturally? But it only lasted, about a decade, less than a decade. But in
Mhm.
that decade, you have massive failure, what they call crop failure,
Right.
which led to a million people dying and a million people leaving the
Mhm.
island of Ireland. So
Mhm.
it says the legacy of the potato famine, the exact role of the British government in the potato famine and its aftermath, whether it
Mhm.
ignored the plight of Ireland's poor out of malice, right, being cruel, or if their collective inaction and inadequate response could have attributed to incompetence is still being debated, right? So obviously the British government failed to take care of the colonists in Ireland. Did they do it because they were heartless, or did they do it because they were just bad at governing? That's a
Mhm.
debate that you could have. However, the significance of the potato famine, or in the Irish language, An Gorta Mór, in Irish history and its contribution to the Irish diaspora of the 19th and 20th centuries is beyond doubt. Now, that's an interesting word, diaspora. Has
Hmm.
anybody ever seen diaspora before?
No.
It's an interesting word. You come across it when you're talking about this sort of topic. A diaspora is like a group of people spread out across the globe. Okay.
Okay.
So Irish people started in Ireland, and then during this potato famine, they emigrated out of Ireland, and so they went not only to America, but they went to Canada and to
Mhm.
other, and then across into Europe, right? They spread out. The
Yes.
Irish diaspora is all those Irish people spread around the world.
Okay.
Sometimes when you're talking about slavery, you talk about if you're talking, looking at the 1600s, 1700s, 1800s, you might talk about the African diaspora. Now,
Oh.
nobody really says it today, and maybe it's not even proper to mention it in the idea of today. But all those early slaves were taken from Africa,
Mhm.
and so whereas the Irish people left of their own choosing, the Africans did not leave Africa of their own choosing. They were kidnapped as slaves, right? But some people
Mhm.
talk about the African diaspora in those African people kidnapped as slaves, not, as bad as that is, spread around the world because there was slaves in North America and South America and even in England and in Europe, right? So a diaspora is a spreading out of people. So anyway, so here it says um, the significance of the potato famine and its contribution to the Irish diaspora of the 19th and 20th centuries is beyond doubt. So it caused those people to spread out around the world.
Mm.
It says Tony Blair during his time as British Prime Minister, and it issued a statement in 1997 offering a formal apology to Ireland for the UK government's handling of the crisis at the time. And that's interesting. So they apologized for something that happens 150 years before. Now, I came across these pictures. This is in New York City. Well, let me read this paragraph real quick. It says Irish hunger memorials. In recent years, cities to which the Irish ultimately emigrated during and in the decades after the event have offered various commemorations to the lives lost. Boston, New York City, Philadelphia, and Phoenix in the United States, as well as Montreal and Toronto in Canada, have erected Irish hunger memorials, as have various cities in Ireland, Australia, and Great Britain. So I presume those are all places that the Irish people went to. Montreal and Toronto in Canada, as we talked about last week, Canada was largely through history British colonies. So those people would have gone really from one British colony to another British colony. It's kind of interesting. And other things, New York, Boston, Philadelphia, Phoenix, Arizona is kind of surprising. I wouldn't think too many Irish immigrants would get all the way to Phoenix, but maybe, who knows? I don't know. But this is an interesting memorial in New York City. They took a city block. I don't know what was here before, but they made a little park, a commemoration to the Irish lives lost. Lots of Irish people came into New York City, and they kind of made a fake Irish hillside with a little bit of, you see rows of crops, maybe potatoes, maybe something else at the top, a fake stone wall. They kind of made in this city block in the middle of New York City, and the Irish Hunger Memorial. And it's meant to be just like a little piece of Ireland. And I think there's some plaques around that you can read information about the Irish people, immigrants coming over, probably talks about everything that they did as part of American culture. But I've looked at this. I like architecture sometimes, and this just looks really cool. It's like a fake hillside, and you can see like you could go under it, I guess. And it's kind of they mean it to be like a little piece of Ireland in the middle of the city. It's kind of neat. Okay, so the Irish potato famine, or they called it the Great Hunger, it really affects American history because it was in America, from the American side, they're seeing that happen across the Atlantic Ocean. They're maybe reading about it in the paper year after year after year, failed crop after failed crop after failed crop. And they're seeing, if you're living in Philadelphia and even in Pittsburgh, you're going to see at that time, you're going to meet Irish immigrants who speak English, but they speak it very differently, and they're Catholic, and lots of Americans weren't Catholic at the time, so they're viewed differently. And we all know people don't always behave the best when meeting new people, the people that are different. Some people aren't good to people that are different from them, as we all know. So that million people that leave Ireland, many of them come to the United States, and that in turn affects American history at the time. Okay. And certainly Irish history. It would be very interesting to read an Irish, let's say we're all, Irish kids sitting in school. I wonder how those kids are taught about this event. That'd be really interesting.
Yeah.
So any questions or comments about this topic?
No, it's good to know.
I
Thank
just
you.
want to say,
Yeah.
I just want to say that I just apologize for not trying to understand what you said. When I thought about slavery, and then I gave you the answer because I knew that's what you were talking about the famine.
Oh yeah, no problem. No problem. No, it's interesting. This certainly isn't I could go my whole life and not know about the Irish potato famine, and it's not going to change my life in any way. But in understanding world history and American history, it's good to be aware of some big events like this sometimes.
Mhm. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Any questions at all?
No, I just say thank you and good to know. I learned something today.
Yeah. Yeah, you bet. Okay. Well, thank you for logging in. I appreciate it. I will send out this reading. I would encourage you just to, this weekend, give it a quick read for 10 minutes, 5 minutes, read it over. I always feel that really strengthens your long-term memory of reading something.
Yeah. Okay.
And then yeah, I appreciate you coming. Ruby, it's good to see you again. And
Yes. You too.
we'll keep doing this every week, and I look forward to seeing you guys next week.
Okay.
Like, we'll see you.
Bye.
All right.
I'll see you later.
All
Have a
right,
great day,
bye.
guys.
Have a wonderful
All right,
weekend.
thank you very much.